Japan's market didn't collapse the way everyone expected it to. That's the first signal people miss. In 1989, Japan looked unstoppable. The Nikkei 225 peaked near 39,000. Tokyo real estate was valued higher than all the land in California. Corporations borrowed endlessly. Households believed prices only moved one way, and global capital treated Japan as the future. Then the bubble burst. And here's what nobody tells you. Japan chose not to let the destruction run its natural course. This is where the pattern begins. In most market systems, crashes are meant to cleanse. Bad debt is written off. Weak institutions fail. Pain is front-loaded so growth can restart. Japan rejected that logic. Between 1990 and 1992, equities lost roughly 60% of their value. Commercial land prices in major cities fell as much as 80% over the next decade. By any textbook definition, this should have triggered mass bankruptcies and social fracture. It didn't. Here's why this matters. Japan separated prices from institutions. It allowed asset values to fall, but refused to let the system implode. Banks were supported. Corporations were kept alive. Employment was protected even as profitability collapsed. Not liquidation. Preservation. That single decision explains why Japan's market behaves differently from anywhere else. Let me show you exactly how that choice was made. After the crash, Japanese banks were technically insolvent. Non-performing loans exploded. Under a Western framework, they would have failed fast. Instead, regulators encouraged what later became known as evergreening. Bad loans were rolled over. Losses were hidden. Time was bought. The goal wasn't efficiency. It was continuity. At first, it looked like denial. Then the bill arrived slowly. Growth stagnated. Deflation set in. From 1995 onward, prices barely moved. Wages flatlined. Productivity gains slowed. Everyone thought Japan was broken. They were wrong. Japan wasn't broken. It was choosing stability over renewal, not collapse. Suspension. That's the distinction. Japan accepted a permanent low volatility equilibrium. Companies stopped chasing aggressive expansion. Investors stopped expecting explosive returns. Households increased savings. The market became quiet. And quiet, in a world addicted to momentum, looked like failure. The danger wasn't what observers saw. It was what they ignored. Japan preserved social cohesion at the cost of dynamism. Unemployment remained low compared to other crisis economies. Crime stayed minimal. Institutions retained legitimacy. The market no longer functioned as a growth engine. It functioned as a shock absorber. Here's the mechanism. Japan's corporate structure is built around coordination, not competition. Cross-shareholding tied companies together. Banks, suppliers, and manufacturers shared incentives. Failure became socially unacceptable. When pressure mounted, the system absorbed it internally. Losses didn't disappear. They were distributed across time. Here's the trap. When volatility is suppressed for decades, renewal becomes harder. Creative destruction never fully arrives. Zombie firms linger. Innovation slows. Capital allocation becomes conservative to the point of paralysis. Japan traded short-term collapse risk for long-term stagnation. That wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And that decision leads to the unresolved question. If Japan's market didn't fail, but also didn't thrive, what does success actually mean? Because survival without renewal may look safe, but it creates a system that only works if time remains abundant. Time became Japan's primary policy tool. That is the part most outsiders never fully grasp. While other systems intervene with force, rate shocks, bailouts, liquidations, Japan intervened with patience. Decades of it. Here's what nobody tells you. Japan didn't try to restart the engine. It tried to prevent the car from breaking apart while it rolled downhill. This is where the system reveals itself. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Japan entered what later became known as the lost decades. GDP growth averaged barely 1%. Public debt climbed beyond 200% of GDP. Equity markets never reclaimed their 1989 highs for more than 30 years. By every growth metric, the model looked like failure. But by every stability metric, it worked exactly as designed. Let me show you exactly how the mechanism operates. The Bank of Japan didn't fight volatility head-on. It diluted it over time. Interest rates were lowered gradually, then pinned near zero. When that wasn't enough, asset purchases followed. Not to spark speculation, but to cap downside risk. Some economists argue this created a market where time, not price, did the heavy lifting. Losses were amortized across generations. At first, it looked like stagnation, then the bill never arrived. That's the key difference. Japan avoided mass unemployment, avoided systemic bank runs, avoided social unrest. While other economies experienced sharp booms and violent busts, Japan experienced a slow erosion that never crossed the threshold of collapse. The system traded intensity for duration, not efficiency. Endurance. That's the choice Japan made. Here's the mechanism again, stripped of mythology. Cross-shareholding reduced hostile takeovers. Lifetime employment norms discouraged layoffs. Banks supported clients instead of abandoning them. Government debt substituted for private collapse. Each piece reinforced the others. Risk didn't vanish. It was internalized. Here's the trap. A system that prioritizes survival eventually struggles to generate momentum. Younger generations inherit stability, but not opportunity. Capital becomes cautious. Innovation moves elsewhere. Some analysts suggest Japan's market today functions less as a growth engine and more as a volatility sponge for the global system. Safe, predictable, quiet. Here's why this matters now. As global markets face higher debt, political instability, and social pressure, Japan's model is no longer an outlier. It's a preview. More countries may choose managed stagnation over uncontrolled collapse, slow decline over sudden shock, time over turmoil. But time is not infinite. That's the unresolved tension. Japan's system works as long as belief holds. Belief that institutions will endure, that debt remains serviceable, that coordination remains intact. If that belief fractures, the model has no dramatic fail-safe. It simply runs out of patience. The danger wasn't what Japan avoided. It was what it postponed. Renewal. Japan proved that markets don't have to collapse to fail their original purpose. They can survive indefinitely while doing something entirely different. So the final question isn't whether Japan's market is broken. It clearly isn't. The real question is whether a world entering permanent volatility will choose Japan's path deliberately or stumble into it without understanding the cost. Because when growth disappears but stability remains, collapse never comes. And neither does escape.